一斉交渉。この札で書店を見尽くさん。
Abu Ghraib. And he followed these combat tours by signing on as a security contractor for the notorious mercenary corporation Blackwater, now rebranded as Constellus. Plattner served as a Blackwater mercenary as recently as 2018.
Honestly, looking back, I think if anything, I went too soft on Plattner. I was trying to be diplomatic and civil in how I was talking about him because I knew that a lot of folks were really invested in his campaign on like an emotional level, and I really wanted those folks to hear me out. After all, as I said in the video, my main concern was never even with Plattner as an individual candidate. I was much more concerned with the tendencies of entryism and opportunism and individualism which Plattner represented, which is why I spent more than 2/3 of the video talking about those problems, and I really didn't spend much time at all talking about Plattner himself. At any rate, at this point, it's all water under the bridge because now that there are allegations of Plattner being violent against white American victims, a lot of the people that were really apologetic about Plattner's violence against people in foreign countries have finally come around to share the view that Plattner is perhaps not the best person to represent any sort of socialist movement. I mean, I would have thought that that was obvious when Plattner was repeatedly saying that he was not a socialist and that he indeed opposed socialism because he's a business owner, but whatever. I'm sincerely not here to say, I told you so, or anything like that. I really just want to talk about the underlying issues and see if we can learn something from the whole Plattner debacle. So my goal here today is to expand on and clarify the points I was making in the last Plattner video and to give a deeper explanation as to why we will never make real, meaningful progress against capitalism by running individualist, personality-driven candidates through the framework of entryism within bourgeois parties. And what's been going on the last week or two with Plattner's campaign melting down is, I believe, very strong evidence to that effect. One of the biggest problems with the collapse of Plattner's campaign was that it happened just days before the deadline to select a replacement candidate.
Yesterday was one of those moments that the Democratic Party here and really across the country had been waiting for. They'd been anxious for Plattner to drop out so that they can begin the process of picking a new candidate. Because remember, they only have until July 27th, just a couple of weeks from now, to pick someone new to face off against longtime incumbent Senator Susan Collins. And the reason we all care about this race is because this is one of those contests that's going to help determine which party controls the Senate. So the stakes are extremely high here.
And if Plattner had just helped to build up a working class collectivist institution, if his platform were not simply a statement of his own personal values and opinions, but rather if it were a platform that had been worked out through organized democratic institutional processes, it would have been easy to just swap Plattner out for some other individual who would agree to uphold the same collectivist, democratically derived platform. We wouldn't have to stress out so much about finding some super special individual with the very best ideas that everyone could vibe with as an individual. The individual that you slot into that role wouldn't matter nearly as much because it would be the working class collective that defines the platform and really essentially holds up the platform. And whoever gets elected will be held accountable to that collectivist platform when the time comes for re-election. So let's start by defining some terms. When I say that Plattner has run an individualist campaign, what I mean is that he is representing the sort of liberal representative democracy ideology that is really ingrained into the bourgeois system of the United States of America. This ideology is really rooted in great man theory, the idea that you have to find some great individual person who has the best, smartest ideas, someone that you like the most, someone that you vibe with. And then once you get that person elected, then you're supposed to just cross your fingers and hope that that great person's personal opinions and decisions and policy positions will actually turn out to line up with your interests. This whole idea is rooted in the cornerstone of capitalist ideology, individualism. The idea that one single person could even represent thousands, even millions of people as an individual is on its face absurd. It's as absurd as the idea that a single individual CEO can earn billions of dollars running a corporation. These sorts of absurdities spring forth from that individualist mindset. Ho Chi Minh wrote about this. He said, "The worst and most dangerous vestige of the old society is individualism. Individualism is the opposite of revolutionary ethics. If it remains in us even just a little, it will wait for an opportunity to develop again, to obscure our revolutionary ethics, to prevent us from fighting for the revolutionary cause." Individualism is very cunning and crafty. Individualism is a major obstacle to the construction of socialism. Therefore, the victory of socialism cannot be separated from the victory of the struggle to eliminate individualism. One of the dangers of individualism, according to Ho Chi Minh, was that it offers false promises of easy solutions to difficult problems. As he wrote, individualism cleverly coaxes people to go downhill. Everyone knows that going downhill is easier than going uphill. That's why it's more dangerous. What Uncle Ho means here is that individualism is designed to give us the illusion that we are making progress, and Graham Plattner's individualist campaign was a perfect example of this sort of illusion. Everyone was getting wrapped up in Plattner as a person, as an individual. They were running on the vibes of his personality. This political culture in the USA has conditioned us to believe that making progress in politics is as simple as voting for a guy who seems really cool as a dude, as a person. There's some cognitive dissonance here, since every American is also pretty cynical about American politicians. You know, we all like to say that they say one thing and then they do another. That's what happened with Graham Plattner. He was saying a lot of things that a lot of people wanted to hear. He was talking about oligarchs and that kind of thing. So a lot of folks fell for it by backing that individualist candidacy instead of building real institutional power of our own for the working class. There's a major problem with all this, and it's that when we push for individualist, personality-driven political campaigns as a solution to capitalism, what we're doing instead is perpetuating the ideology that upholds capitalism. And worse yet, we are ingraining capitalist organizing principles into our practice. We're basically reinforcing capitalism instead of building a socialist alternative. I got a lot of comments on that Plattner video from folks asking, what kind of alternative do you have? Who's a better candidate than Plattner? You're just raising problems, but you're not offering solutions. But in that video, I was very clear. There is no easy alternative, no perfect individual candidate you can just switch your vote to in that primary.
We aren't really getting leaders that we choose through our own methods. We aren't getting leaders that we develop to suit the ideologies that we democratically agree to sign on to. We are getting leaders who are good at winning bourgeois elections. And guess who gets to set up the criteria for who wins bourgeois elections? The bourgeoisie.
And that's because we still have not done the work that we have to do in building up our own working class institutions, which we democratically control as workers. That's not to say we have absolutely no institutions of our own. We do have working class parties and unions and organizations out there with a lot of awesome comrades trying their best to build up power for our own economic class. But those folks doing that work will be the first to tell you that they need more support. They need more hands on deck, more people participating and struggling with that hard work of building up an organized revolutionary working class movement. But that sort of work is uphill work, as Ho Chi Minh would put it. It's a lot more difficult to build up a party, to democratically develop a collectivist platform, to work with and communicate with the people, to develop institutional power that can truly reflect and empower the working class outside of the capitalist system. It is much easier to just browse through and pick the individual candidate that you think is cool, vote for them, and then tune out for 4 years until the next election. And that's why capitalists designed the system the way they did. They don't want us doing that uphill work. They want the working class to go downhill in every sense of that word. Now, a lot of you also pointed out correctly that in the political system of the United States of America, there are a lot of structural barriers to running third-party candidates. So in many elections, it is necessary to run a perhaps socialist candidate through the DNC, just because the system is so rigged for the Republicans and the Democrats. And I am not denying that. I did not deny that in the last video. I'm not denying that now. I will say that does vary a lot from place to place and election to election. In many cities, for example, local elections are officially nonpartisan, meaning that candidates aren't even allowed to officially represent any political party. So there are opportunities there. And different states have different rules for how candidates get on the ballot or how easy it is for third parties to get a fair chance in elections. So there is not a one-size-fits-all solution to this problem. It's going to vary from place to place. But I do recognize, of course, that the problem does exist, especially in national elections. So I want to point out now that running a candidate through the DNC is not in and of itself entryism. Entryism in the USA specifically would be a program of trying to invade the DNC, pack candidates into the DNC so that you can turn it into a working class party. And I just still maintain that that is not a viable option because it is run by billionaire donations and lobbyists and that sort of thing. That is like built right into the structure of the DNC. You're not going to be able to root that out through electioneering, especially if you don't build institutional power outside of the DNC to make that happen. Anyway, I did try to point out that even the DSA, which pioneered that strategy of entryism in the USA, has largely given up on it by now, with a large portion of the membership moving away from entryist realignment strategy and towards what some people call a dirty break with the DNC. And you can debate all day as to whether those are viable strategies or not. I myself am not a member of the DSAs, so I don't really have a pony in that race. If you want to debate about the merits of DSA political strategy, then what I would say is go to your next local DSA meeting and get involved with them. And then you can actually be part of the decision-making process about that stuff. The truth is that I myself, as an individual YouTuber, cannot and will not even try to prescribe to you or the DSA or anyone else the exact solutions to these complicated problems we face with trying to build up a working class institutional apparatus in the USA. Sometimes it might be necessary to run candidates through the DNC. I grant that. Often we'll need to try to build up power completely outside of the bourgeois electoral system, using things like direct action and building up dual power structures. That sort of thing. I don't know exactly what is or isn't appropriate, especially wherever you are, whatever local conditions you have in your particular city or state. And there's no single one-size-fits-all solution to these problems. And by the way, I do recognize that this is a very America-centric video. Sorry, most of the people that were confused about these issues in the last video were, of course, from the USA, but I think a lot of this stuff probably applies to other countries as well. You let me know in the comments if you're from another country and you're facing similar issues. I'm actually very curious about that. Anyway, the way we find actual workable solutions to these problems and answers to these questions is not through endless debate and arguing online. It's through practice, by trying out, testing these strategies in the real world, seeing what works and what doesn't. The reason I'm so opposed to individualist candidacies and entryism and everyone rallying behind an individual personality like Graham Plattner is because it has been proven to have all these problems. If the individual that you're rallying behind ends up being a dirtbag, then the whole movement is suddenly thrown into crisis mode. Whereas if you have an institution that you are building up, then any given particular individual, like I said, you could swap that person out. You can find somebody else who's a better candidate to lead forward and continue the work that everyone has been collectively building. And on that note, I do want to address another bit of criticism I received in the comment section of that Plattner video. A few of you thought that it was hypocritical of me even to oppose entryism as a revolutionary strategy, to only then turn around and say that we do have to be willing to work across lines with Democrats to achieve certain shared goals. Now, to me, what I said there was just common sense, and I don't really see how it can be conflated with the strategy of entryism. The point is, we're really only just beginning to build a socialist movement in the USA. We have to work across lines right now and make compromise if we want to achieve incredibly important immediate goals, such as ending the genocide in Palestine. And I think that the Palestine situation is a perfect example of what I'm trying to talk about here. We can't wait until after the revolution to fight the genocide in Palestine. That would be an absurdly cruel proposition. Most people in the world right now who are anti-Zionists and supportive of Palestine, after all, are not communists. Most people in the US who are supportive of Palestine are not communists. So are you really going to tell me that you refuse to march with anyone, to work with anyone, to struggle with anyone for the liberation of Palestine, to end the imperialist project of Israel, unless they are also communists who share all of your views? Let me do a quick history lesson here. I guess I need to get my bow tie. 1 second. It's been a long time since I've tied a bow tie. There we go. Now I'm prepared to discuss history on YouTube. In 1905, the Tsar of Russia created a state parliament known as what Google tells me is pronounced as the Buligin Duma. Russian speakers tell me if I'm wrong, but it is pronounced as the Buligin Duma. Russian speakers tell me if I'm wrong. But it was designed, this Duma, to only offer consultation and advice to the Tsar. In reality, it was completely powerless. And so Lenin's Bolsheviks called for a boycott of the Duma. Lenin argued that this initial refusal to participate in this sham of a parliament enriched the revolutionary proletariat with highly valuable political experience and showed that when legal and illegal parliamentary and non-parliamentary forms of struggle are combined, it is sometimes useful and even essential to reject parliamentary forms. It would, however, be highly erroneous to apply this experience blindly, imitatively, and uncritically to other conditions and other situations. The Bolsheviks' boycott of the Duma in 1906 was a mistake, although a minor and easily remediable one. The boycott of the Duma in 1907, 1908, and subsequent years was a most serious error and difficult to remedy because, on the one hand, a very rapid rise of the revolutionary tide and its conversion into an uprising was not to be expected, and on the other hand, the entire historical situation attendant upon the renovation of the bourgeois monarchy called for legal and illegal activities being combined. Today, the very rapid rise of the revolutionary tide and its conversion into an uprising was not to be expected, and on the other hand, the entire conversion into an uprising was a mistake, although a minor and easily remediable one. The boycott of the Duma in 1907, 1908, and subsequent years was a most serious error and difficult to remedy because, on the one hand, and subsequent years was a most serious error and difficult to remedy because, on the one hand, a very rapid rise of the revolutionary tide and its conversion into an uprising was not to be expected, and on the other hand, the entire historical situation attendant upon the renovation of the bourgeois monarchy called for legal and illegal activities being combined. Today, a rapid rise of the revolutionary tide and its conversion into an uprising was not to be expected, and on the other hand, the entire historical version in 1907, 1908, and subsequent years was a most serious error and difficult to remedy because, on the one hand, a very rapid rise was a remediable one. The boycott of the Duma in 1907, 1908, and subsequent years was a most serious error and difficult to remedy because, on the one hand, a very rapid rise of the revolutionary tide and its conversion into an uprising was not to be expected, and on the other hand, the entire historical situation attendant upon the renovation of the bourgeois monarchy called for legal and illegal activities being combined. Today, when we look back at this historical period, whose connections with subsequent periods has now become quite clear, it becomes most obvious that in 1908 to 1914, the Bolsheviks could not have preserved, let alone strengthened and developed, the core of the Revolutionary Party of the proletariat, had they not upheld in a most strenuous struggle the viewpoint that it was obligatory to combine legal and illegal forms of struggle, and that it was obligatory to participate even in a most reactionary parliament and in a number of other institutions hemmed in by reactionary laws. Now, what Lenin is doing is he is making an argument against dogmatism. You can't use the same solution in every single situation. You have to look at the situation and find a solution that matches the circumstances and conditions, everything that's going on, right? And that's part of why we practice dialectical and historical materialism, more on that later, so that we can get a comprehensive and historical perspective so that we can find the best strategies to suit our situation. When we're trying to make decisions about things like whether and how we participate in monarchist or, in the case of the USA, bourgeois electoral politics, we need to be wise and flexible enough to distinguish when a strategy might be effective and when it might lead to failure. We must avoid dogmatism and rigidity, and we must learn to distinguish what forms of compromise are acceptable and what forms of compromise constitute true betrayal of our principles as socialists. So jumping back into that historical perspective, in 1918, Russia signed the Brest-Litovsk peace treaty with Germany, which ended Russia's participation in World War I. This treaty was worked out between the German imperialist monarchy on one side and the brand spanking new revolutionary Soviet government of Russia on the other side. And it was one of the first and most politically significant decisions that had to be made immediately after the communist power. The Russian workers and soldiers were fed up with the war and they wanted it over. So this was kind of a very important thing to get right. There were a lot of communists, however, in Russia. This revolutionary Soviet government, imperialist monarchy on one side, and the brand spanking new revolutionary Soviet government of Russia on the other side. And it was one of the first and most politically significant decisions that had to be made immediately after the communists had seized power. The Russian workers and soldiers were fed up with the war and they wanted it over. So this was kind of a very important thing to get right. There were a lot of communists, however, in Russia who opposed the peace treaty with Germany on the grounds that it constituted compromise with imperialists. And I'll let Lenin tell the story from here. That it fed up with the war and they wanted it over. So this was kind of a very important thing to get right. There were a lot of communists, however, in Russia who opposed the peace treaty with Germany on the grounds that it constituted compromise with imperialists. And I'll let Lenin tell the story from here. And it seemed to them that the Treaty of Brest-Litovsk was a compromise with the imperialists, which was inexcusable on principle and harmful to the party of the revolutionary proletariat. It was indeed a compromise with the imperialists, but it was a compromise which, under the circumstances, had to be made. Today, when I hear our tactics in signing the Brest-Litovsk Treaty being attacked by the socialist revolutionaries, for instance, or when I hear Comrade Lansbury say in a conversation with me, our British trade union leaders say that if it was permissible for the Bolsheviks to compromise, it is permissible for them to compromise too. If I hear Comrade Lansbury say in a conversation with me, our British trade union leaders say that if it was permissible for the Bolsheviks to compromise, it is permissible for them to compromise too. I usually reply by first of all giving a simple and popular example. Imagine that your car is held up by armed bandits. You hand them over your money, passport, revolver, and car. In return, you are rid of the pleasant company of the bandits. That is unquestionably a compromise. I give you money, firearms, and a car so that you give me the opportunity to get away from you with a whole skin. It would, however, be difficult to find a sane man who would declare such a compromise to be inadmissible on principle, or who would call the compromise an accomplice of the bandits, even though the bandits might use the car and the firearms for further robberies. Our compromise with the bandits of German imperialism was just that kind of compromise. Now, I think that this is a perfect analogy for what I'm talking about when it comes to working with Democrats and liberals who oppose the genocide in Palestine. We need to be wise and flexible enough to determine which liberals and Democrats we can forge tactical alliances with to make things easier for Palestinians and to hopefully end the genocide, without losing sight of our own principles and knowing which red lines we are not willing to cross in these dealings. Lenin goes on to describe counterexamples of when compromise is not appropriate, when working with the enemy does constitute a betrayal of the working class. For example, when World War I broke out in 1914, many moderate Russian socialists adopted a stance of what they called revolutionary defensism. And this argued that Russia had to stay in the war for various reasons. Some argued that it was the best way to oppose German imperialism. Others said that defeating Germany would be the best way to secure the revolution. After the February Revolution of 1917 overthrew the Tsar, many of these same moderate socialists entered coalition governments and supported continuing the war alongside Britain and France, despite the fact that the workers and the soldiers desperately wanted the war to end. Lenin also gave examples of the bad sort of compromise that betrays the principles of the working class that occurred in Germany. For instance, in 1914 with the Social Democratic Party of Germany, also known as the SPD. And side note, this is the party that Karl Marx heavily criticized in their founding document, the Gotha program. So in Karl Marx's critique of the Gotha program, he heavily criticized a lot of these reactionary Lassallean tendencies. If you want to learn more about that, it's very interesting. We do have this video on it. Check that out after this one if you want. Anyway, those reactionary tendencies might be why this guy, Philip Scheidemann, the head of the SPD, voted to approve funding for the German military to really dig into World War I. And this was in contradiction to the well-established socialist pledge of the Second Internationale to oppose all imperialist wars and to use the crisis of war to advantage working class struggle. Then later, at the end of World War I, Scheidemann became the Reich President Minister of the newly formed Weimar Republic. And Scheidemann, the SPD, the liberal parties, the bourgeoisie, they feared a Bolshevik-style communist takeover of the German government. And so Scheidemann, as president of the Weimar Republic, relied on the German military and far-right paramilitary organizations known as Freikorps. These were kind of the embryonic form that would eventually build into like the Nazi party. So these were like early prototypical fascists. It was these very highly reactionary political gangs, along with the German military, that crushed the communist uprising that was beginning to spread across Germany. And ultimately this led to the brutal murders of revolutionary communist leaders Rosa Luxemburg and Karl Liebknecht. And Lenin cited these and many other compromises as actual betrayal of Lenin's political gangs, along with the German military, and far-right as a Bolshevik-style communist takeover of the German government. And so Scheidemann, as president of the Weimar Republic, relied on the German military and far-right paramilitary organizations known as Freikorps of the newly formed into World War I. The guy, Philipp Scheidemann, the head of the SPD, voted to approve funding for the German military to really dig into World War I. And this was in contradiction to the well-established socialist pledge of the Second Internationale to oppose all imperialist wars and to use the crisis of war to advantage working class struggle. Then later, at the end of World War I, Scheidemann became the Reich President Minister of the newly formed Weimar Republic. And Scheidemann, the SPD, the liberal parties, the bourgeoisie, they feared a Bolshevik-style communist takeover of the German government. And so Scheidemann, as president of the Weimar Republic, relied on the German military and far-right paramilitary organizations known as Freikorps. These were kind of the embryonic form that would eventually build into the Weimar Republic, relied on the German military, and they feared a Bolshevik-style communist takeover of the German government. And so Scheidemann, as president of the Weimar Republic, relied on the German military and far-right paramilitary organizations known as Freikorps. These were kind of the embryonic form that would eventually build into like the Nazi party. So these were like early prototypical fascists. It was these very highly reactionary political liberal parties, the imperialist wars, and to use the crisis of war to advantage working class struggle. Then later, at the end of World War I, Scheidemann became the Reich President Minister of the newly formed Weimar Republic. And Scheidemann, the SPD, the liberal parties, the bourgeoisie, they feared a Bolshevik-style communist takeover of the German government. And so Scheidemann, the SPD, the liberal parties, the bourgeoisie, they feared a Bolshevik-style communist takeover of the German government. And so Scheidemann, as president of the Weimar Republic, relied on the German military and far-right paramilitary organizations known as Freikorps. These were kind of the embryonic form that would eventually build into like the Nazi party. So these were like early prototypical fascists. It was these very highly reactionary political gangs, along with the German military, that crushed the communist uprising that was beginning to spread across Germany. And ultimately this led to the brutal murders of revolutionary communist leaders Rosa Luxemburg and Karl Liebknecht. And Lenin cited these and many other compromises as actual betrayal of the working class, because all of these socialists had entered into compromises with the bandits of their own bourgeoisie and sometimes of the allied bourgeoisie and against the revolutionary proletariat of their own countries. All these gentlemen were actually acting as accomplices in banditry. The conclusion is clear. To reject compromises on principle, to reject the permissibility of compromises in general, no matter of what kind, is childishness, which it is difficult even to consider seriously. A political leader who desires to be useful to the revolutionary proletariat must be able to distinguish concrete cases of compromises that are inexcusable and are an expression of opportunism and treachery. They must direct all the force of criticism, the full intensity of merciless exposure and relentless war against these concrete. Distinguish concrete cases of compromises that are inexcusable and are an expression of opportunism and treachery. They must direct all the force of criticism, the full intensity of merciless exposure and relentless war against these concrete compromises, and not allow the past masters of practical socialism and the parliamentary Jesuits to dodge and wriggle out of responsibility by means of disquisitions on compromises in general. It is in this way that socialist leaders dodge responsibility for the treachery they have perpetrated, for having made a compromise that is really tantamount to the worst kind of opportunism, treachery, and betrayal. These are different kinds of compromises. One must be able to analyze the situation and the concrete conditions of each compromise, or of each variety of compromise. One must learn to distinguish between a man who has given up his money and firearms to bandits so as to lessen the evil they can do and to facilitate their capture and execution, and a man who gives his money and firearms to bandits so as to share in the loot. And each variety of compromise. One must learn to distinguish between a man who has given up his money and firearms to bandits so as to lessen the evil they can do and to facilitate their capture and execution, and a man who gives his money and firearms to bandits so as to share in the loot. In politics, this is by no means always as elementary as it is in this given up his money. And firearms to bandits so as to lessen the evil they can do and to facilitate their capture and execution, and a man who gives his money and firearms to bandits so as to share in the loot. In politics, this is by no means always as elementary as it is in this childishly simple example. However, anyone who is out to think up for the workers some kind of recipe that will provide them with cut and dried solutions for all contingencies, or promises that the policy of the revolutionary proletariat will never come up against difficult or complex situations, is simply a charlatan. Cut and dried solutions for all contingencies, up for the workers some kind of recipe that will provide them with cut and dried solutions for all contingencies, or promises that the policy of the revolutionary proletariat will never come up against difficult or complex situations, is simply a charlatan. If there's one thing I hope we can all agree on with Lenin here, it's that politics are complicated. Human society is complicated. Revolution is very complicated. If it were easy, we would have achieved victory a long, long time ago. And we here at Non-Compete do not make these videos because we expect everyone to just blindly agree with us, and we don't need to agree on everything to have friendship and solidarity. In fact, we need to share our disagreements with each other in a constructive way if we want to have any hope of resolving them. And one thing I've learned from comrades who are much wiser and more politically advanced than I am is that we can all benefit from having a little humility. Each and every one of us has made mistakes with our political analysis and our political practice at some point or another in the past. I myself have made all sorts of mistakes. I've made big mistakes in videos that I've published to this channel. I have probably dozens of videos that I have deleted over the years because I said something that I later realized was BS, or I suggested practices that I later decided weren't really very effective. I might also be making mistakes in this video right now. Of course, I don't think I am. We've all worked here on the Non-Compete team very hard to try to avoid making mistakes in this video, like we do with all of our videos, but it has happened before. It is certain to happen again. That's just what happens when you try to do something that is very difficult. And revolution is very, very difficult. As Ho Chi Minh said, when we practice, it is difficult to completely avoid mistakes. We are not afraid of making mistakes. We are only afraid of making mistakes without being determined to correct them. In order to make good corrections, one must be willing to listen to public criticism and honestly engage in self-critique. And here's where I want to specifically address any of you who might seriously disagree with something I've said or a position I hold. Maybe you think entryism is a good strategy. Maybe you think running individual candidates who are really cool that people can vibe with is the way to go. Whatever, that's fine. I'm not here to force you to agree with me. That's really, really not my goal here. My goal is simply to get you activated, to get you involved in some form of practice. If there's one piece of advice I do feel comfortable at this time giving you, it is this. Let's all try to waste less time arguing about which strategies might or might not work on the internet. We will not find answers to these questions through endless debate and talking and discourse. The real answers will come, I promise you, through practice. So if you think entryism is the way to go, then by God, join an entryist organization, put your heart and soul into entryism. But remember what Ho Chi Minh said, if and when you start to realize that you're making a mistake, be ready to admit it. And if you succeed and you manage to have the socialist revolution through entryism, then I will admit it. We have to be ready to critique and self-critique and correct our course whenever we realize that what we've been trying isn't working. I can tell you with all humility, again, I have made all sorts of terrible mistakes. I've had terrible ideas in the past. The most recent mistake I can think of actually was in that last Plattner video, because again, I think I pulled my punch. I think I should have gone a little stronger in my view on Plattner. Maybe I could have softened the blow for some people when all of this fallout happened with Plattner if I had done a better job explaining exactly why he was a terrible person to be pushing, especially in a personality-driven campaign when he had such a toxic personality and he had done so many horrible things and said so many horrible things in the past and not truly accounted for those things. I should have been stronger about that. That was a mistake I made. This is me doing self-critique right now. It's as easy as that. It is painful. It sucks to tell people you're wrong, especially when we come from the culture that we come from, where being wrong seems like some kind of inexcusable moral failing or something like that. We have to retrain ourselves from that culture. We have to understand that making mistakes is what comes from practice, and practice is good. Practice is a virtue. So in a sense, making mistakes is a virtue because it comes from doing something, trying to fix the problems. And so when you make a mistake, it's really not a bad thing at all, if you're willing to admit it and correct the issue, correct the problem. In the end, it is very worth it. Self-critique is very cool. It's a very good thing, because even if it might sting our ego when we get all the I told you so comments on the YouTube video, which, I've been through that plenty of times, it hurts, but doing so truly strengthens the movement, and it helps all of us as individuals. In the end, that's what collectivism is all about. We were all raised in a very toxic form of capitalist imperialist society. We have all been indoctrinated. And it stands to reason that we will make some boo-boos every now and then, that we have gaps in our knowledge, we have things that we're not noticing, reactionary tendencies in ourselves that we're not noticing. Ho Chi Minh had something to say about this as well. We must recognize that due to the influence of bourgeois ideology, some comrades initially took a stubborn stance, held vague views, and followed incorrect ideology. Fortunately, through training in revolution and in the resistance war, most of these party members have in general improved their positions and become loyal to the revolution. And those comrades who have been able to position and in the resistance war, most of these party members have in general improved their positions and become loyal to the revolution. And those comrades who have been able to improve themselves have understood this truth. Leaders who make mistakes will lead the masses to mistakes. Therefore, whenever mistakes are made, we must be ready and quickly correct them. We must never allow many small mistakes to add up to a big mistake. Therefore, these comrades know how to honestly criticize themselves and sincerely criticize other comrades in order to make progress together. There is an art to critique and self-critique, and it's not something that comes easy to those of us who are raised in this capitalist hell world. It's easy to fall into individualist practices of belittling others, becoming patronizing and obnoxious, and resorting to sophistry and dishonesty in order to win the debate, as though winning an argument with a comrade is more important than resolving our differences to free ourselves from capitalism. Ho Chi Minh wrote about this as well. There are still a few comrades who are bound by individualism and become arrogant and conceited. They criticize others without wanting others to criticize them. They do not want self-critique, or they perform self-critique in a dishonest and unserious way. They are afraid that, or they perform self-critique in a dishonest and unserious way. They are afraid that self-criticism will destroy their reputation. They do not listen to public opinions. They despise people outside of the party. Not listening to criticism and not self-criticizing is bound to make us backward and regressive. Those who become backward and regressive will be abandoned by the masses for being backward and regressive. This is the obvious result of individualism. So listen, I mean it when I say all of these disagreements and points of contention we have can be resolved, but they can only be resolved through practice. When Ho Chi Minh said that those comrades had been taught through revolution, that's what Ho Chi Minh was talking about. He was talking about learning through practice, finding out what works and what doesn't through the experience of putting on the revolution. So if you strongly believe in some solution or some strategy, then get out there and test your ideas in the real world. Find folks that you can agree with and help build something awesome. For those of you who did find the ideas in this video compelling and you want to learn more, I hope you'll check out our free ebooks on dialectical and historical materialism, which is the philosophy behind all of our analysis on this channel. You can download these right now at banyanhouse.org/shop. Click through to the item description. A lot of folks have problems with that. Click through the item description, then you can download the ebooks for free if you'd like. You can also leave a little donation if you want to help support the translation. And if you found these quotes from Ho Chi Minh interesting, speaking of translation, you might be on Ho Chi Minh's philosophy of revolutionary optimism. optimism. Take care of each other. We'll see you next time. Bye-bye.
防護システムはよし、正常に稼働しているわね。そろそろお茶会でも開こうかしら。みんな空いていると。私の育てている花々はこういう天気が好きなの。またスネージナヤパレスに戻れってお達し？はあ、どうしてしょっちゅう集まりがあるのかしら。 律令直汚い。ここにてもう一度6308式。やりなさい。ついてきて。くだらない。
15律令直安
全距離。ついてきて。やりなさい。演算開始。いけるわね。
律令直
先生出て戦法開け。権限。くだらない。ついてきて。ティータイムの余興よ。
律令15
諸行無常。さあ一休みしたいわ。6308。演算開始。やりなさい。そろそろお茶会でも開こうかしら。みんな空いているといいのだけれど。